Welcome back to Business Week here on Arise News. Well, from proxy rivalries to political shockwaves, Africa's largest economy, Nigeria, of course, is once again in the geopolitical crosshairs. In a move that stunned diplomats and markets alike, US President Donald Trump threatened military action against Nigeria over what he termed, and we quote, widespread persecution of Christians. The comments triggered global headlines and nervous glances in financial circles, but just days later, Nigeria defied the noise, launching a $2.35 billion Eurobond that drew over $12 billion in orders, reflecting either investor confidence or something more complex. At the same time, Nigeria's emergence as a critical minerals hub with untapped reserves of lithium, niobium, manganese, and rare earths places it at the center of a growing resource Cold War, particularly between the US and China. So, is this really about religion or resources? Could a fragile macroeconomy withstand diplomatic rupture with its largest bilateral trade partner? And how might capital markets, the naira, and Nigeria's strategic borrowings be reshaped in the shadow of gunboat diplomacy? Joining us now for this special deep dive is Tilewa Adebajo, CEO of CFG Advisory, to help us unpack the issues. Because even me personally, sometimes I get confused. Great to have you here. So I want us to start on the geopolitics of it all. You know, give us sort of the backdrop of where we are now.
Okay, first of all, remember Michelle Obama?
Yes.
And bring our girls back.
Yeah,
Chibok
bring back
girls.
our girls, the
Okay.
Chibok girls, yeah.
Yeah. At that point in time, I think Nigeria had the support of the international community. But unfortunately, there was an operation that was launched by the international community to rescue the Chibok girls. But the international community felt that the Nigerian military compromised the operation by leaking certain
Some information,
intelligence.
yes.
So basically, we lost confidence when it came to intelligence sharing. They refused to sell arms to us. But fast forward that, the same Donald Trump. Buhari visits
In his
Donald
first
Trump.
term, yeah.
Yes, and Donald Trump says, okay, we're going to analyze this theater of war. And we believe that the best thing for you to do is to buy these Super Tucano aircraft,
yeah.
which are turbojet aircrafts, because it's not a conventional warfare. So Donald Trump approves a more than $500 million deal for Buhari then to buy these Super Tucano aircrafts. Now, these Super Tucano aircrafts are proven aircrafts in Afghanistan, and America realizes that for the theater of war we're dealing with, it's something that we need. This is a very, very specialized aircraft. During the Second World War, the British had the Mustangs. It's a turboprop. It's not it's a propeller. It's not a jet. The British had the Spitfires. The Americans had the Mustang, and the Luftwaffe had what you call the Messerschmitts. So this aircraft you're seeing is a turboprop aircraft that has incredible capability. It's not even an American aircraft. It's made by the Embraer. But what the Americans do is they bring this aircraft and they equip it with advanced technology, superior avionics, and of course, a wide array of deadly missiles.
Right.
So the Americans came and they developed a new squadron for the Nigerian Air Force based in Kainji. They spent $50 million setting up that base in Kainji to be able to support that aircraft. And eventually, we have a squadron of these aircrafts. So I think Donald Trump believes that if you take a look at the Nigerian military, we spent 6 trillion naira on our defense budget this year. So with all this money we've been spending on the defense budget,
how have been able to curb the insecurity?
So basically,
terrorism,
people feel that we have the capacity and we have the equipment to do that. And don't forget, Donald Trump has put us on this list then. It was Biden that removed us from this list. So America is not threatening any invasion. What America is saying is that Nigeria, we know you have the capacity and we've equipped you to be able to deal with this. Go deal with it. If you don't, then we will
take action. Yeah.
We will take action. So I think we should leave it at that. And you know that when the British Prime Minister went to see Donald Trump, he had a letter from the King to invite him on a state visit. It's all about high-level diplomacy.
Interesting.
So what we need to do is that we need to get the special envoys, we need to get the ambassadors, we need to get the lobby groups, and we need to do Donald Trump diplomacy. It's Donald Trump diplomacy, it's not normal diplomacy.
Okay.
So that is what Nigeria needs to realize and get going on the Donald Trump diplomacy bandwagon. Once you do that, then you have his attention, then everything will come back to normal.
Yeah, and the thing with the tactics of the Donald Trump diplomacy, it forces you kicking and screaming to the negotiation table, which it seems like the Nigerian government is capitulating to potentially. But having said all this,
Yes.
right, and having had this backdrop, markets move even in the absence of action. Even headlines alone can drive markets. You don't actually need to take military action
Yes.
for stocks to fall or bond yields to go through the roof.
Yes.
So tell us what all this means for Nigeria's economy. And interestingly, it comes amidst this Eurobond issue, which was oversubscribed. Does that mean there is a disconnect or severance between these major geopolitical events and markets, or is this really about yield chasing? Tell us what it means.
It's about returns.
Yeah.
And it's about returns. We're not even on the JP Morgan bond index. So the bond was priced in accordance to our credit rating. And of course, the factor for me that was the key factor was the removal of Nigeria from the grace list.
Right.
Once Nigeria was removed from the Great List, it boosted investor confidence. And so the next step for Nigeria now is to get on the JP Morgan index. Once we get on the JP Morgan emerging market bond index, then you'll see that our yields now will begin to fall. But if you take a look at our current credit ratings, it matches those yield profiles. And what that means for Nigeria at this stage of our economic reforms is the fact that at least on the international community, despite or in spite of those threats, there's still an interest and confidence on the reforms.
Absolutely.
So what this government needs to do is that they need to continue this confidence building on the reforms. And what this government now needs to do is they should use this as a wake-up call to let them understand that what people want to see are these reforms. That is what matters more than any other political issue. You just go and set up your Donald Trump diplomacy team and manage Trump. It's as simple as that. It's not a big deal. It's a diplomatic issue. Trump understands what happens in Nigeria. He did this deal with us, and he's surprised that we still have not been able to manage this terrorist issue, despite the fact that they have set up a squadron for us with an A-29 Super Tucano fleet that is an aircraft that will do ground support and will do missions and reconnaissance.
Yeah.
So he's surprised that he knows that we have the capabilities to deal with this threat.
So, it's interesting because I'm skeptical about the idea that Trump's agenda is a single item agenda. And what I mean by that is we've been talking about critical minerals for a while. And against the backdrop of this, the terrorism issue, Nigeria's ability to counter the threat domestically, is this idea of a new front in a sort of Cold War between China and the US, insofar as minerals are concerned. We know about Nigeria's crude oil credentials, but all those critical minerals and rare earths, which Nigeria is said to have, Nigeria is in the list of top 5 or top 10 in terms of reserves of some of those critical minerals. Do you see that really as playing a factor, which many have speculated?
No, I disagree with that form of...
Why?
Why? And I'll tell you why I disagree with that. The Dangote refinery has changed. America has not been importing our crude oil for a long time. And America is reaching some level of self-sufficiency with crude. We're actually importing crude oil from America. So Dangote has a deal with the refineries on the east coast of America where they're sending crude to Dangote's refinery. He's refining crude for them and he's sending it back to them. So that is why, for instance, we're having this sort of trade increase with America, and it's crude. America used to import our crude. Now we're importing crude for America. So in terms of trade numbers, trade with America is $5 billion. It's less than $5 billion. Trade with China is $25 billion. I've always said this, that what the government needs to do now is to get the $25 billion worth of trade and services that China is doing to get these Chinese companies to start manufacturing in Nigeria instead of importing directly from China. That is really where diplomacy should be. So if you look at trade with China and America, it's disparate. The disparity is significant. It's 5 times. What is significant now is that China has the Belt and Road Initiative.
Which Nigeria
so they have put in $25 billion in this half year. And that money is going into an oil and gas project in the Niger Delta, There's a green hydrogen project, and there's also a lithium project, and there's also a renewables project, which will include solar PVs. So China is making its own investments in line with its Belt and Road Initiative, which everybody knows about. And Nigeria is a singular beneficiary. So now that $25 billion has come in the first half of this year from China. These issues, for me, are not related.
Okay.
Trump's call to Nigeria at this time is based on his domestic base. You realize there was an election in America which they eventually lost, Virginia,
yes,
New Jersey, and a communist, unquote, Trump calls him, mayor has emerged in New York.
In New York, yeah.
So these are things that Trump was trying to use to rally his evangelical base. And we also have to understand that the evangelical base has a strong voice with Trump. And maybe it was politics domestically, we're not sure. But in terms of the geopolitics you're talking about, in terms of our strategy, we're not there yet. In terms of Nigeria. The problem is our foreign policy. We need to define our foreign policy. Nigeria traditionally has been a non-aligned nation. We've had good relationships with everybody. China, America, the West, and that's the Nigerian strategy. We need to redefine our foreign relations and go back to our welcoming. Basically everybody is welcome in Nigeria, and that's the way we've done it. Okay,
all right. Against this backdrop, it's really interesting your stance on this. I mean, the Chinese government seemed to have wading a bit in debate, sort of, putting out stronger rhetoric around its relationship with Nigeria, especially after this Trump threat. But assuming all of what you've said is true, and this is really about Trump sort of rallying his domestic constituency and looking at Nigeria's counterterrorism efforts domestically, if for any reason, hopefully highly unlikely, that this situation escalates beyond what most Nigerians hope or the global or African community hope, what risks do you think Nigeria faces economically? Because the threat of action or intervening is very different from the reality of it. If the US government feels that Nigeria has still not done enough, what impact do you see that having potentially economically? What is the next stage of escalation?
What Trump has said very clearly is that...
So you think it's just rhetoric and they're not actually going to come in?
I really don't think they're going to come in. And I'll tell you the reason why. And I'll tell you what the worst case scenario would be. It's a warning shot that we know you have the capabilities to resolve this problem. Go ahead and resolve this problem. So we know you have capabilities and we've given you the equipment. We've given you a squadron of aircraft that can support your ground troops, that can do reconnaissance, and that can carry out strikes. And we've given you the right equipment and the missiles to do that. You have that equipment. And they've actually given us clear terms of engagement and how we can use those Super Tucano aircrafts. They've told us that this is your theater of war for this equipment we've supplied to you. You cannot use it outside this theater of war. So Americans are very focused on that. Use this equipment to make it effective. So the worst that can happen is that Americans will use their drones and select certain targets and strike those targets. That will not impact us economically in any way that I see. Because at the end of the day, what we need to do is to stay the course on our reforms, and government should begin to manage its fiscal expenditure properly. The government should understand that now is the time to focus on the economy. We need to tidy up the 2024 budget. We need to tidy up the 2025 budget. We need to start preparing the 2026 budget. Government needs to tighten its expenditure, and government needs to focus on getting the economic system up and running.
Especially because we have less than 2 years to the next election.
Exactly. And besides that, again, you see that the investor community has put confidence into
Nigeria. So that should be a sign.
So you need to begin to give these people more confidence. Because if we get on the JP Morgan Emerging Market Bond Index, if our credit rating should go to investment grade, it endears investors to us. So once we've done that, it is these American investors that will go and talk to Trump and say, hey,
chill.
wait.
Yes.
We have interest here.
Yeah.
You just cannot go do this.
And
that is what we need to do.
And you make a very good point, because America, even, under today's scenario, has a lot of business interest in Nigeria. But I want to sort of quickly pick on something you said. You talked about Nigeria's foreign policy. Now, one of the things that this situation has raised in my mind is Nigeria's appearance on the global stage. We're now facing a new fragmentation in global cooperation. How should Nigeria hedge itself between all these competing geopolitical blocks? We're seeing the BRICS nations, the emerging markets with Nigeria. Are we in? Are we out? Are we an ally? You talked about the non-aligned movement historically. But, where should we be looking strategically, in terms of our foreign policy, which will then tie into our economic diplomacy and the amount of access we give to the world superpowers into our economy?
Everywhere. You can't ignore China. So you need to have your bilaterals with China, and you have to have your engagement with China. You cannot ignore the European Union.
Right.
You need to have your engagement with them. You cannot ignore America, and you cannot ignore the BRICS nation, and you cannot ignore the African Intercontinental Free Trade Agreement.
Absolutely.
It's a global world. It's a strategy. You need to have your diplomatic strategy set out along your economic lines. So it's very, very simple. Like I've told you, when the British left when they did the Brexit and left the EU, they were isolated and they were depending on America. And when they saw Trump come in and was doing tariffs and was not looking anywhere, they quickly went in with their diplomacy and invited him for a state visit. So we're with you, and this is what we want from you. So you need to do your targeting. You just don't appoint an ambassador to Washington
or become
anymore.
reactive.
Exactly.
Or
You have to calm down and go the diplomatic way. Who are your people in Washington? It's no longer just sending anybody for political appointment to these embassies anymore. You have to have people who know America, who are schooled in America, or you have to people who know China, and distribute people and know that you have a strategy to engage the world based on your economic interest. We have somebody like Bayo Ogunlesi in the States who is with BlackRock. How are you using Bayo Ogunlesi? How are you engaging him to ensure that he's able to reach his own network in America, to ensure that we're doing things right, and to use his own investor network that, yes, our reforms are there. So you need to be able to show credibility, bring people like Bayo Ogunlesi on your side, and let him handle the global investors for you. There are many other Nigerians like Bayo who are in very important places around the world.
Absolutely.
So we need to bring them together and show. But what I believe is more important is that if we can demonstrate that we're serious about our reforms, we're serious about growing our economy, the international investment community will protect us from the political fallouts.
Absolutely. And I think you make some very sort of salient points. Looking at everything that has happened in Nigeria, I sort of almost feel like a lot of the economic dimensions, the drivers we're seeing have been sort of domestic and homegrown. So your central thesis here is that this is Trump trying to force the government's hand on military cooperation. From an economic macro perspective, we're still on the right path. But just looking at this Eurobond issuance, and we often talk about government borrowing and debt. Right, we're borrowing at what I still think are pretty high yields, right?
Yes, but what is your credit rating?
But there's no credit rating. Yes. That is, so it's not investment grade. It's not investment grade.
Yes.
I understand that, but this issue of then borrowing, looking at the proceeds from that Eurobond will be used to fund what domestically, and the quality of that spending is absolutely going to be key. So going forward, looking at our debt strategy, what should really be the principles guiding our debt strategy, giving all these other dimensions that you've mentioned very quickly?
Well, we need to, for me, I see this debt financing as a stopgap measure.
You're right.
We need to look at the Fiscal Responsibility Act. I believe that the Fiscal Responsibility Act upgrade is even more important than this tax reform. Because if you get your fiscal side right, then you won't have a problem. The problem of Nigeria is the fact that in 2019, we had 25 billion in excess crude account.
Yes.
Okay. That 25 billion in our excess crude account was the buffer that saw us through the global financial crisis. Then comes Amechi and Fashola, governors that say that they must spend that money because it has to be allocated to the states. No. You're supposed to have put significant amount of that money into a sovereign wealth fund to be able to buffer you against all these uncertainties and headwinds in the global economy and even within your domestic economy. All of a sudden, the last 10 years in Nigeria, we've seen deficit financing. That was not the case. You do not have that buffer anymore. Now you create a sovereign wealth fund. The stabilization fund in your sovereign wealth fund that is supposed to fund your buffer is less than 100 million. So we need to look at the path. We need to return to the path of fiscal responsibility.
Absolutely.
And I think this is what the coordinating Minister of Economy and the Finance Minister is doing with his new program, with the debt management, the medium-term debt strategy. And they need to control that. And we need a tight budget. We need a tight budget this year. We can no longer afford the level of government spending. It's not sustainable. It's not the debt. It's the government spending that needs to come down.
Thank you. So very well said, Mr. Tilewa Adebajo. Really fascinating, your take on Trump-Nigeria tensions and the Tucana aircraft. I didn't know you were a military strategist as well. Have you been reading, what's that Chinese war?
No, I grew up reading Commando, these comics as a kid.
Okay.
So I'm fascinated
Clearly,
with
that
World War
knowledge
II.
is really coming through and complementing your economic prowess as well. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Rolake.
Well, that's all we have time for on Business Week this week. I'm Rolake Akinkunmi-Filani. Let's continue the conversation on X. Do have a lovely rest of the weekend. See you soon.